Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our podcast, EPG Talks. I'm your host, Ana Maria Nicolica, EPG researcher, and today I'm joined by my colleague, Costin who is head of data analytics at EPG. Costin, thank you so much for accepting this invitation.
Hello, and thank you, Anna, for hosting this important discussion.
So today we're actually gonna discuss our latest paper on the topic of the ETS2 and the Social Climate Fund, which happens to be co-authored by the both of us, along with our dear associate Daniel Duma and Mihnea Cătuții. So, but before we actually dive into this, into the findings of our paper, I would like for us to set the scene a little bit for our listeners, so they kind of understand what is carbon pricing, what is the ETS system, which stands for emission trading system. And basically, what is the idea behind all of these climate policies?
It started in 2005. It's actually it started on the 1st of January 2005, and it was designed as the main EU instrument in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. It's a cap and trade system, meaning that large installations, mainly from the energy and industry sectors, have to receive and buy allowances for their emissions. Essentially, they have to pay for their emissions. It's called cap and trade because the level of emissions, the number of allowances each year are reduced in order to reach the targets of the European Union of reaching net zero by 2050. Now it's the oldest, so it was the first when it started. It was the first in the world. Since then, similar systems have been adopted in the world. In Canada, for example, in USA, in Argentina, in South Africa, in China.
Yeah, I guess it's important to mention that not the whole US, but rather specific states, right?
Yes, California, okay. Yeah, and now at country level it was adopted in New Zealand, in China, in Australia, in Japan also. So it's been regarded as a good example, and since 2005 it has been adopted worldwide. Now, what we know right now is that it's working. So in the last 20 years, it managed to reduce emissions by almost 50% in the installations that it covers. So we know it's working, but its main limitation is that it only covers 40% of the emissions in the European Union. Now, let's have this broad overview because it covers energy production, it covers large installations in industry,
such as
for cement production, steel production, ammonia and fertilizers, and so and so on. So it doesn't cover buildings and transport or agriculture. What I mean by buildings and transport is that we are looking at fossil fuels being burned mostly in buildings for space heating. So we are talking about wall-mounted gas boilers or boilers that use fuel oil or coal. So these have emissions, And when we're talking about transport, we're not talking about aviation because that's already covered.
In the ETS1.
It was added in
and also
recently.
maritime transport.
Exactly, and also maritime transport. We're talking about road and rail transport mainly. So diesel and gasoline. Of course, it's also LPG used in the road sector, but it's a pretty small amount. So now with ETS2, ETS2 it's actually a name for the extension of the current ETS to mainly to buildings and transport, but also small industry. It's important to look at small industry because it's specifically affected throughout the European Union, but also in Romania. So the scope is to try to limit emissions as much as possible. And in doing so, they're trying to implement this very efficient mechanism of carbon markets. So it's actually the European Union and the national authorities are not imposing companies and the society to stop emitting at once, but it's through a price and market mechanism.
Yeah, basically through a price signal, you are encouraged to start investing into low carbon alternatives and give up the polluting fossil fuels status quo.
Yeah. Now, before going to the Social Climate Fund, I need to list the clear differences between ETS2 and ETS1, because having significant social impact, ETS2 was designed to be on a specific market, a separate market from ETS1. Why will there be a social impact? Now, ETS1 covers, as we mentioned, large installations and large companies.
Yeah.
Now, extending this to transport and buildings, that means addressing not only small companies, which also have burn fossil fuels in the buildings they occupy, or in the road and rail transport, but also the population. So we are talking about all the gasoline, the diesel, and the natural gas being distributed to the population, be it companies or households. So this is why the Social Climate Fund was made to try to address the social issues. But this is only an instrument in ETS2 and addressing the social problem. For example, the main instrument is that ETS2 is on its own market, which will have its own price, and there's a threshold set there of 45 euros per ton of CO2, and if the price goes above that the threshold, there are two main mechanisms in which the European Union can intervene and try to limit the impact on population.
If it's too dramatic.
Exactly. So first of all, it's a different market with a different price and different intervention mechanisms. Second, the Social Climate Fund was designed to help the ones that are most affected by the ETS2 and the rising prices of fossil fuels, because it was imagined that the carbon price will have almost 100% pass through to the population.
Just a second to kind of explain this to our listeners. It is not us, the consumers, who will directly pay for the allowances and trade them. It's actually the suppliers, the gas suppliers, the gasoline suppliers, which will have to pay the ETS allowances and trade them. And then this is like the price signal that's going to be passed on to consumers, right?
Yes, and
Okay.
thank you for bringing this up because it's another major difference between ETS2 and ETS1. In ETS1, each big installation, each company has to do its own monitoring, its own reporting to the European Union, but
And
you
they have
can't ask from each household to
to
do
do
the
all
same
of this.
thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So the burden is on the suppliers. So the companies supplying the natural gas, the gasoline and the diesel will have to do this reporting and the participation on the carbon market.
Okay, so basically, consumers are going to be impacted in their bills.
Exactly. Only that. Only in the
All
bills.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, super interesting. So, going back to the Social Climate Fund directive. So, there is this impact that consumers will face, and some of them might become vulnerable once the ETS2 starts to fully fledgedly kick in. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think the Social Climate Fund directive brings new? Like, because it's meant to tackle energy poverty, transport poverty, vulnerable micro enterprises, but we know that in Romania, because energy poverty is mainly a phenomenon that's affecting people who heat their homes with biomass. So, how do you see the synergies between the already existing framework and what the Social Climate Fund Directive brings new?
First of all, the Social Climate Fund Directive is very inclusive. It addresses, you mentioned energy poverty and transport poverty. So now looking at the definitions in the Social Climate Fund Directive, you can see that it clearly mentions energy poverty, transport poverty, but it also brings vulnerable groups. Now, energy poverty and transport poverty are not new concepts. So we've been dealing with them for years now. What it brings new is vulnerable groups that are the ones which will be most affected after the implementation of ETS2.
So basically, at the moment, they are not necessarily in a vulnerable position,
Exactly.
but once the ETS2 kicks in, they're going to be kind of like on the edge of like being vulnerable to be maybe even step into energy poverty or transport poverty.
Exactly. So the main difference is that the Social Climate Fund Directive definitely targets the ones in energy poverty and transport poverty, but it mainly tries to address the ones that will be most affected by the ETS2, and this also includes the ones that are in energy poverty, while also trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So now, if you look at the definitions, these groups overlap because vulnerable to ETS2 means the ones that are already using a lot of fossil fuel, and when the ETS2 will be implementing, by the fact that they are using a lot of fossil fuels, an increasing price will affect them.
Okay, and now kind of like we had this conceptual discussion about what the ETS2 means, the Social Climate Fund Directive. So let's try to zoom into the Romanian case and talk about the potential impact of the ETS2 in numbers according to EPG's calculations, and what kind of makes us different from other EU countries.
Now, EPG has conducted a study for 2 years between 2021 and 2023 on 5 countries on Romania, Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria. And it found out that the impact is quite different because Poland uses a lot of coal, Germany uses for heating their homes oil, while Hungary and Romania uses natural gas. So there are some differences between these countries. Romania stands out as using the most biomass of all. So almost when we're talking about households, and it's important to have this distinction between the impact on households and the impact on enterprises. So when we're talking about households, almost half of them use firewood for space heating. So that means that they won't be, in theory, affected by ETS2
Okay.
or the primary target of the Social Climate Fund Directive. When I say the primary target, so it wasn't designed to help the ones that don't use fossil fuel, but in the definitions, it is mentioned that they will cover there has to be some part of the fund covering the ones that are already in energy poverty,
Okay.
regardless of the fuel they're using. But again, also this stemmed out from the discussions with the European Commission. Member states can allocate funds for the ones that are not using fossil fuels, but the main of the funds,
The meat of the
yeah,
fund,
exactly,
basically.
should go to the ones that are not only using fossil fuels, but also are dependent on those and lack the means of switching to alternative
Low carbon.
yes
Yeah. Alternatives. Yeah.
yeah, to low carbon alternatives. So this is the main novelty brought by the Social Climate Fund Directive is the vulnerability concept. So we are talking about households that are either in energy poverty or in transport poverty, or after the introduction of ETS2, they will be significantly affected in terms of their expenditure and lacking the means to switch to either to renovate their homes, because a lot of the costs with fossil fuels go to space heating. When we're talking about households, and also switching to green transport, switching to either fully electric cars or low emissions vehicles,
Yeah.
meaning hybrids.
Yeah.
So it is destined for these groups that are seen as the most impacted by the ETS2 implementation, and they also lack the means of
Switching to.
switching
Yeah.
to
According to the Social Climate Fund regulation, basically member states will have to write social climate plans where they will design measures, predict their impact in lowering emissions, and basically state how they will spend their allocated sum from the fund. And the eligibility of the measures is basically dependent on how much on their potential to lower emissions. And we know that tackling energy poverty, for example, or any type of vulnerability, oftentimes was restricted to giving away vouchers for the vulnerable population. But this time, the regulations strictly says that only around 37% of the fund can be allocated for direct income support, and the rest should be
Targeted towards investments. Yeah.
Exactly, investments. Now, can you give us a few examples of what type of investments the social climate plan should contain?
When looking at the definitions and the scope of the social climate fund, we can see that they also recommend measures there. So there's a direct link between the measures they recommend there and the definition of vulnerable groups. For example, when we're talking about vulnerable households, the measures which are listed in the Social Climate Fund regulation as examples target mainly building renovations and switching to greener alternatives. That means trying to renovate as many buildings as possible to the highest standard of NZEB. It's also important here to mention that those are not the only eligible measures achieving the highest standard possible. You can also do partial renovations or partial interventions. For example, if you want to switch to low carbon heating solutions, for example heat pumps, you would need a different higher capacity electric wiring, so it covers even that.
Okay, so basically you have the framework to
exactly
implement this measure.
Exactly, and not only full renovations, you can do partial renovations there. The key thing here is both when we're talking about buildings and transport interventions is to try and do the most with the money you have. So for each measure you're proposing, you should have a calculation on which the main target is to reduce the number of vulnerable households or enterprises. So, but of course, that's not only that's not the sole criteria. It's the reduction of vulnerable micro enterprises or households, but also the reducing emissions, GHG emissions, and also energy efficiency. So, for example, when renovating a building, not at the highest standard, but I don't know, a class B performance, you can lower the emissions and the energy consumption. The energy consumption, you can lower it by 60% or more.
Okay.
So having in mind that when we're talking about all the energy used in a building, most of it is for space heating. So when we are having in mind just a simple standard renovation that's been it's been done in Romania for quite a while now. So only that brings you an efficiency of almost 60% or even more in colder areas of Romania. And it has a huge impact. So the thing is, the measures look at buildings and systems producing energy, either the heat or the cold during the summer, but also cooking, for example, migrating from gas to electricity will also reduce
greenhouse gas emissions.
Exactly,
yeah.
But in a smaller amount than
renovating, insulating,
yes, insulating the building. So also another way of reducing greenhouse gas emission is to reconnect or to expand district heating networks, and
Now,
it was interesting to find this specific measure
yeah,
in
yeah.
the regulation.
Yeah, it's actually, I really wanted to ask you this, also more on a personal note. Do you think that people who actually disconnected from the district heating network will reconnect to it again due to higher bills for heating?
I mean, we already have an example of this. Oradea has seen a lot of households reconnecting to the district heating networks. So it's a matter of cost. If a
Okay, okay.
household sees that reconnecting to the district heating lowers its cost significantly, it will eventually drop the gas boilers in in favor of
Interesting.
district
Because
heating.
I feel also, I feel that in Bucharest, for example, people have lost their trust, their public trust in the district heating network and in the authorities managing all of this. And it's kind of like, yes, it's more costly, but I'm just gonna do whatever I can to afford this because I can't no longer go on without or with interrupted heating and hot water.
Yeah, it's seen as unreliable, and this is the main reason for the huge deconnection from the district heating
Yeah. So, do
networks.
you think we could actually also fund district heating network
Refurbishment.
with
Yes, not from the social climate fund.
Okay, not from the social
And
climate fund.
this is where the synergies with other financing sources
Okay.
comes into play.
Or maybe just ETS2 revenues, because there's
Of
also
course.
going to be
Of course.
revenues from
ETS1 also, so ETS2 revenues, those could be used to refurbish the and renovate the district heating networks. And also, why not expand it?
Okay.
And improve it with low carbon solutions. For example, adding heat pumps and making a synergy between the district heating network and the heat pumps. So technical possibilities for switching to greener alternatives are there, and only the ones targeting directly the vulnerable communities are supported from the Social Climate Fund.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. It's a flexibility note given by the Social Climate Fund regulation, in which you can use the funds, you can allocate the funds not only to the vulnerable consumer directly, but also to companies and intermediates, as long as you prove that the 100% benefit goes to the vulnerable community. So it's a flexibility given to. That means, for example, that you can. We're talking about measures. For example, in Romania, the public transport system is widely used, and it covers almost all the territory. So this flexibility means that you can allocate funds from the Social Climate Fund to transport companies. To transport companies that mainly cover vulnerable areas, vulnerable communities in the definition of the Social Climate Fund.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and
because
also,
public transport is definitely a cleaner alternative to owning a car.
Yeah. Also, so there was this idea that we also do not have a second-hand market for EVs.
Yes.
So basically asking somebody who is on the verge of vulnerability to switch to an electric vehicle is kind of impossible if the alternative is already way too expensive for them. This is where public transport is a solution, and the railway, for example, railway system could be modernized in synergy with other funds like the National Resilience and Facility Plan or Transport Program. The measures can be complemented with other measures from other funds, from, for example, the Environmental Administration Fund, from, as I said before, the National Recovery and Resilience Plans. There's also regional programs that there's plenty of opportunities.
Continuing on the measures, at this moment we have measures targeting building renovations. We have switching to greener alternatives, mostly PV panels, solar PV panels, but also we have financial support for the ones buying low emissions vehicles or battery vehicles, full electric vehicles. Now, these are already covered by alternative funds. So what each country must do is try to think of a way of making them work together, all these funds, making them work together, so as to try to target best the vulnerable communities, the vulnerable transport users, and the vulnerable households. Because as you mentioned, some of them that will be best covered by the Social Climate Fund are already covered by different financing programs. So in those programs you have more flexibility than in the Social Climate Fund. So the flexibility in the Social Climate Fund is certainly limited. So the main thing is that it mostly targets the end user. This is why, from my point of view, I will try to rethink how those financing programs are working, so that I will try to see in how I can transfer those measures on the Social Climate Fund and keep others that complement the ones in the Social Climate Fund.
Yeah, and this also comes now. I think we can also move on with the discussion and talk about stakeholder engagement and public participation, because as you were saying, these measures are already in place, but some of them through other funds, right? But the question is, are they really effective? Do they actually reach vulnerable communities? And this is how we could actually tackle the effect of the measures, to see if they are rightly tailored to respond to the needs of these communities by effectively engage them, by going in the field, talking to them, focus groups, whatever form of public participation and stakeholder engagement form you want. Because the regulation clearly stipulates that the plans should be elaborated while ensuring early and effective public participation, reasonable timelines, and the public to be informed. Now, this is pretty vague, and we have examples from last year when the NECP was updated that public participation was not really high up on the political agenda when it came to updating these plans. And why is really important that carbon pricing policies are made with the public while involving the public? Because they're very contentious, right? They are problematic for some people, they spark public resistance, and people are concerned around how you're going to set the price, about the impact, about how you're going to redistribute the revenues, right? Because at the end of the day, it's their money. So it's crucial to boost the social acceptance of the social climate plan and of the measures tailor these measures. And this happens with knowledge from the field, with knowledge from the people. Engaging regional stakeholders, municipalities. So as far as I've read, much of the debate about the social climate fund was how do we make the targeting? Where do we get the data from? How do we have enough capacity to gather all of this data, update it? So maybe the social climate fund is the opportunity to get all of these details straight and to actually maybe even allocate some money for informing and capacity building in this area to effectively engage the public. So, yeah.
Now, it's from my point of view, it's crucial to have a stakeholder engagement when talking about social policies, because we have a lot of NGOs, not only in Romania, but in other countries, a lot of NGOs studying the social problems. And this also this is also the case of Romania. For example, we have NGOs that are specialized in addressing energy poverty and addressing transport poverty, which have done field work, as you mentioned, which have done extensive studies on the impact of ETS2 and the particularities of each country. Now, this knowledge was generated by these NGOs, and also I was mentioning the study done by EPG, which also adds to the body of knowledge generated for Romania right now. And I would like to use this opportunity to go back to the specific issues for the national context, so the specificities of Romania. Now, transport poverty in Romania deals part with the lack of access to essential services, but this is having in mind the high coverage of public transport. This means high commuting time. So we have coverage, but people who use the transport complains about spending a lot of time. So this is a result of the research done by the NGOs I was mentioning.
Yeah, there's a lot of insights that you wouldn't know from the central government level, right?
Yes, because these studies are done by NGOs and are targeted by NGOs. Another thing is enforced car ownership. So there are communities and households who, in their need for access, education, healthcare, jobs, need a car, and most of them are lacking the financial resources to buy a new electric vehicle. This is one of the reasons why Romania has one of the oldest car fleets in Europe. So we are talking about very low efficient old cars.
Precisely.
This is where the Social Climate Fund can come to help by, as you mentioned, helping to build pre-owned electric vehicle market.
Yeah, like a second-hand market.
Another result from the study is that the studies made, because several of them were done on Romania, is that the impact on households will not be very high. I mean, if we consider the threshold level of 45 euros per ton of CO2.
Yeah, but first of all, it's very important to mention that the Social Climate Fund has a limited amount of time of enforcement. Like it's only until 2033, right?
So yes, 2032.
Yeah. So including. So basically until then, the price will not skyrocket, right?
Exactly. There are market intervention mechanisms that I mentioned at the beginning. So yeah, it's limited in time. So the number of years in which countries should make the switch to cleaner alternatives is not unlimited. So now going back to specificities and results. If we consider the average consumption of a Romanian household for natural gas, for the ones that use it both for space heating and hot water, we're talking about an average of 100 cubic meters of natural gas being used on average monthly, of course, higher during the winter periods and lower in the summer. Now, doing the calculations results in 8 euros per month in addition. So the bill will go up by 8 euros per month for this.
Yeah, and we're also talking about a segment of the population which is not in the lower income deciles, right?
We should bring this into discussion, income deciles, because when we are talking about vulnerable communities and energy poor, the income deciles is most often referred to. So now, the first, as you mentioned, the first income decile is not so dependent on natural gas because about 80% of them are using firewood for space heating.
Exactly.
But if we go to the second and third income deciles, who can also be labeled as being poor or
after the ETS2,
the impact is generally much higher because those are the ones you have in significantly larger proportions, households that use gas and are dependent on it for hot water and space heating. So certainly there's an overlap. So income deciles, the analysis on income deciles shows that although the lowest income decile is not affected, is not using a lot of fossil fuels, the second and the third actually do use and are also relying on the natural gas. We're talking about communities and small urban areas that were once connected to the district heating. Due to lack of investments, that district heating system collapsed, and they had to switch to gas alternatives, gas boilers. Now, being in a small urban area and not having the means to renovate either from the local administration unit or own funds of the households means that there are, according to the definition of the Social Climate Fund, the most vulnerable in this group, the vulnerable households. So they will be mainly targeted if we go with the definitions from the Social Climate Fund regulation, because they are lacking the means to renovate their buildings and are reliant to natural gas. They can't switch to anything else. And also the public administration funds, this is also important to have in mind because these areas also lack the means at local administration level to design a program to renovate these buildings. So they would be the ones targeted. Also, when we're talking about transport poverty and deciles, the lowest income deciles are not do not actually own a car, so they are reliant on public transport. So one measure could be targeting electric vehicle or low emissions vehicles for public transport. So vans and buses covering the areas with most vulnerable households. Also, one idea was to try and um, act at the level of energy community and to see what their needs are and how we can address at a community level the accessibility problems.
Yeah, yeah.
So, regarding income deciles, these analyses made by the NGOs and think tanks provide precious information in how to best use the funds from the social climate fund.
Yeah, 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 super interesting. I think we're kind of approaching the end of the discussion and we should wrap up, even though we're both pretty passionate about this topic and we could just go on for ages talking about this. But yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about recent developments, the fact that so far the ETS2 directive has not been transposed into national legislation. And well, we have a new government. Last year was election year. This year is again election year. So, of course, when we were talking about how contentious the ETS2 is. And it's not only for Romania. I mean, many member states have had delays in transposing the ETS2 directive. So far, the priorities of the new government in the governing program do not really address the ETS2 impact or make reference to it. It's just a short mention at the Ministry of Investments and European Projects that they are planning to spend 30% of the fund by 2028. So it might be a bit concerning that in the new governing program and the new government doesn't really engage with this topic. Now, as the wrap up and main conclusions, what do you think our listeners should have as key messages from our discussion?
I think that the most important message derived from the research being done on this topic is that it will be a carbon price implemented on natural gas, on gasoline, and on diesel, but all research shows that the impact, at least in the first years, will be limited, will be less than 10 cents per liter of gasoline or diesel or cubic meter of natural gas. So, and having in mind the average consumption levels of households, this would mean for a household using natural gas and gas boilers would mean less than 10 euros a month on increasing their bills. Now, if they also own a car, on average, a Romanian household uses a full tank of fuel each month, but that also means increasing the expenses with this less than 10 euros a month. So the studies converge on the fact that the impact will be limited at least in the first years.
Yeah.
That's the first message. The second message is being a carbon market and having reduced allowances each year means that if this implementation of ETS2 is not followed by investments in cleaner energies, that means that the cost will be higher and higher. Now, this is where the Social Climate Fund comes into play in synergy with other funds. As I mentioned, one of the highest impact measures is renovating buildings. So by actually making a consistent and well-targeted plan on buildings renovations, in which of course you can't cover all of them at once. So this is where that direct investment support comes into play. Now, you can have this direct investment because you can't go at once renovating all buildings for vulnerable consumers. So by the time you get to them, to their building, having in mind that they will be already impacted by ETS2, you have this instrument of 37% direct income support, which you can lower their bills. So you can use these funds to lower their bills until
support
you reach
them in this transition.
until you reach their buildings with renovations. So from my point of view, it's key to have a well-planned set of measures, and this should include synergies with other financing programs, because by itself the social climate fund has limited impact on populations,
100%.
and it will work best if it's helped by other funds. And from my point of view, this is one of the best means of addressing energy poverty, and unfortunately Romania has a lot of energy poor. So and this is also reflected in the high allocation that Romania received from the European Union. It has the 5th highest allocation in the European Union. It receives it was allocated 6 billion euros, and this has to be topped up with 25% by the Romanian government. So we are looking at almost 8 billion euros in this fund being used by Romania.
Okay. Thank you so much for the discussion, Costin. It was very insightful, and we hope that our listeners are also enlightened by our discussion. And I'll see you again on another episode, I guess.
Thank you very much. And yes, we'll see each other and on a different topic.
Yeah, thank you.